So I have someone on the video right now. His name is Scott Donald. He's a Google Workspace developer. I'll let him tell you what that means and a little bit about what he does. And then we'll go into some examples. I'll show you a named function, and then he's going to extend that concept with some of the new functions. Scott, welcome. How's it going?
Thanks, Adam.
So, Scott, what is a Google Workspace developer?
Uh, Google developer experts can run across the whole range of the Google ecosystem. So for me, I'm a Google Workspace developer expert, and I think another title they've given us is a Google Cloud Champion. They're two different programs.
All right. So when we use the word Google Workspace, so Google Sheets is what a lot of these tutorials are in. That's the actual spreadsheet app. But Google Workspace is more akin to have your email, your calendar, a lot of apps that people are familiar with from Google, but they're wrapped in, they're presented together, and you can pay for it for work and use it kind of like you would Office 365.
Yeah, absolutely. Google's very gracious in offering a free tier that we've all most of us have been using with Gmail, starting with Gmail, and then moved out to Google Sheets, Google Docs, Slides, Forms. There's even a coding back end for all those applications called Google App Scripts, which is based on JavaScript, and that's entirely free too. And then for organizations, the tier levels up and gives you more access to certain things with the business plans and the beginners and basics and enterprise plans. So that's the entire Google Workspace ecosystem is basically a business management ecosystem.
Okay, and when he says Google Apps Script, to me, that's so I get a lot of questions on the videos that I make, and some people ask about doing something that's just not built into Google Sheets. So they'll ask, well, so how can I sort this data and then copy the top 5 results to a new spreadsheet or something? And my answer is usually, I don't know, but maybe you could do that with Google Apps Script. So those are things that Scott can actually do. But now I think it's makes sense now to I'm going to show what's called a named function, which is delving a little bit into a way that you can customize the way Sheets works. And then Scott's going to extend that concept. So let me share my screen. I did a tutorial on this earlier on another channel that I have called Sheets Help, which is just about Google Sheets. But what it is so there's inventory listing here, and there's a column for days old. So if you're in, let's say, a managerial accounting department, that's where all the exciting things happen, by the way, it's in the accounting department. And you wanted to age the inventory. So you wanted to look at it by category and then by average age and then total price. So you can analyze your warehouse and you can say, man, this glass that I have is 513 days old. We really need to move that. Maybe we need to lower the price or put our salespeople specifically on that product. Whatever you do when you find out your inventory is old, looking at this, it's really old. I think I probably need to update the dates on here. Regardless, when you're doing something like this, like we mentioned earlier, there's no real built-in function to Google Sheets that will take an inventory list, summarize it, age it, also put in the price, and output it as an array all from one cell, right? So if I click into G8, everything that's in G8 all the way down to I-19 is driven from this one cell. So I use the query function, and we won't go into the query function too much because the point of a named function is that you only have to type it once. So I wrote this query. I did it mostly by trying to figure out, but looking online to copy the syntax because the query function actually brings a SQL language into Google Sheets. So it gives it a lot of power and flexibility, but it's a totally different syntax. So I got this written where it outputs the items. And then here we're summing the quantity and the cost to get this price, total price. And then we're averaging the days old here. And then we're even outputting column labels, which is something that like the filter function, the sort function can't do. So query function is really powerful, but it's hard to learn, which is why I think it's a good example for a named function. So let's
Absolutely.
say, yeah, so sometimes I forget Scott's on the line. I'm used to doing these videos myself. Um, Yeah, feel free to chip in, Scott, but I think, this is a pretty beautiful formula, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, I love query functions. They're fantastic, and they can give you so much diverse information. But as you're saying, it can be incredibly intimidating if you're passing this function off to an everyday user and they have to update it or change it. So, 100%, let's make this into a name function.
All right, so it's a good candidate for it. I'm embarrassed to say how long this took me because I certainly didn't just whip this up, but I did get it to work, and it is my own function. But there's certainly some credit due to probably 15 other websites that I looked at. So that's the query function. I do that once, but let's say this is a monthly analysis that you do, right? You don't have to redo that every month. Let's come down to the named function. I'm going to leave it here and then I'm going to step through how I made it. So let's double click in here. It's the exact same function. So it's called inventory value now. I came up with that name. All you have to do is make sure that it's not a pre-existing name. So I couldn't name it sum or average, but
Mm.
I did name it something that makes sense for what it does. And I'll show you how I did this. If I hit the escape button and I come up to insert or not insert, I come up to data and I select named functions. It will bring a window up to the right, little sidebar here. And the one that I made is already here. And we're just going to look at that instead of adding a new one right now. I'll link to the video about this if you want to see more in depth. So I won't walk through the entire thing, but we will take a look. So if I hit edit, you give it a unique name, you give it a description. So when I go into the function here and I double click, the description is what you see when you drop down this box, right? So you make it function like any of the built-in functions. So what I type for description comes here in the about, and then you define the formula and that comes up here. So if I click next on the sidebar, you give it a few optional details and you give it an example of a range. So that comes through also in this helper box. When I scroll up and look at it, that's the example of the function. All right, so I'll come over and close that window.
How much easier is that to read, though, and to reapply it? I mean, you could just chuck it up in another cell and run another version on that on a different range so quickly.
If you make a copy of the sheet, they come with the sheet.
Yeah, I've set these up as a template before as a whole bunch of functions, or you can even open up a new sheet and then you can import the name function.
So that's the basics of how you use the name function. Now we're going to move it over to Scott, and he's going to show some of the more complicated things that he does in his sheets. Now we're looking at Scott's spreadsheet.
Cool. So Lambda functions came out at the exact same time that name functions did. I guess there's a fairly important reason for it is with Lambda functions, they help you name your functions a bit better and more clearly. And they also help you do a vaster range of things, particularly working with arrays or multiple arrays and combining them together to make new and interesting things. There's a lot of, with Google Sheets, there's a lot of things you can do in many different ways. And Lambda functions gives you another way of handling this. On its own, Lambda functions aren't particularly useful. They are able to name your function more clearly. So we can set things, for example, I can set this range to minutes and set it to seconds. So if another user comes in, they can read things a bit better. But the power comes in when we use the helper functions for name functions. So right now, the helper functions include map, reduce, by column, by row, scan, and make array.
They seem so
So to,
useful, don't they?
yeah,
I remember the press release. I thought, oh, those look great. And I haven't used them since. So I'm curious to see how you use them.
I think the primary ones that are the most useful but can trip you up a bit are the map function, reduce, and scan. But before we do that, it's probably important for us to understand what Lambda function does. So what have I got here? I've got a column that contains minutes and a column that contains seconds. What we want to do is, in this first example, is just simply convert this 10 minutes into seconds. Now, we know we can simply go 10 multiplied by 60, and that will get us 600 seconds. But we want to understand the Lambda function. So what we can do here is type in Lambda, and then Lambda requires us, let me expand that a bit for you. Lambda requires us to add in a parameter. So it's something we can name. Here we can set this parameter to minutes. Spell. There we go. And we can add in a number of parameters here, but we only got one because we're just looking at this cell here at the moment. And then we can add our formula expression. So what do we want to do with our minutes? Well, we want to multiply our minutes by 60 seconds, and then we can close it. Now we're going to get an error at the moment. With a Lambda function on its own, it's also going to need to take this extra side braces over here, and that's going to direct what this minutes is related to. So this could be a value, so we could say 5, and you could see, you might be able to see if you squint, the 300
Yeah.
seconds appears here, but we can also reference a cell just like a normal function, which is what we're going to do here. And I'll hit tab to get out of that, and that's giving us minutes to seconds. Again, not incredibly useful on its own, but just hold that thought and we'll move over to the map in a minute. Okay, let's do another one where we want to combine 10 seconds and where we want to combine 10 minutes to 44 seconds with a colon between the two. Now, the standard approach here would be to use concatenate or join or a text concatenate. I like to use join in this situation,
Now that
which
was
has
a
a,
that one was around before, right? Join?
yeah, join's been around for a long, long time. Here, we're going to then add the value followed by a comma and then the second value, and then we have our
Mm.
result. So let's just move that into a Lambda function now. So we'll go Lambda.
And Scott, what you just made, was that a piece of text or a number?
That would be a piece of text.
Okay.
We could convert that to a number, but it's a different approach. I've actually got a video tutorial on that somewhere in my files, maybe a
All
year or
right.
two old now.
If you dig it up, we can link to it.
Sounds great. Okay, so what we need to do first is state what our parameters are going to be. So the first one is going to be minutes, and then the next one is going to be seconds. So right now it makes it really easy for someone who hasn't seen this sheet before to see what this Lambda function is about because it's already stating these parameters. And then from here we can set our formula expression, which is going to be this, going to be the join.
Hmm.
And we'll put in our delimiter. And then we will type in our minutes here. Oops. And seconds. And then we need to reference where this is coming from. So we'll put this on this little curved brackets on the side, and that's going to be this cell and this cell. I'll hit tab. Oh, we got NA.
It's live television here, people.
Live television is happening. Ah, okay. So here we've got to put in an extra curved brace here, and then we'll close that off. And there we go. Crisis averted. Breathe a sigh of relief. Okay, so now you can see that this is the basic Lambda function. It's a bit useless, like I said, but what if we wanted to fill out the entire array of minutes to seconds here? Or what if we wanted to make this join function follow all the way down for all the values in both of these cells? Let's go over to map and try it out.
So at this point, you've made those functions, and it's really just a more complicated version of what you could just type in directly. And now you'll show us how you can extend it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like at this stage, the only benefit of using the Lambda function is that we can see that what's going on by these parameters here.
Hmm.
So we're using minutes and we're using seconds, and they're being put into this formula here, and this is their reference point. That's the only use of the Lambda function at this point in time.
Okay.
But as I said, it becomes when it's actually being used, it's more often than not being used with these helper functions. Okay, back to it. So let's go over to here. So we're going to do the same sort of function, but we're going to start off with the map function. And the map function is going to contain at least one array. So the first one that we have is this minutes array. that we're going to drag in here. And then we can see we can add another optional array, and the square braces indicate that we can add multiple optional arrays in. So I'm going to do that here. And once we're done, which we are, we're going to start our Lambda function. Okay. So just like before, we're going to add in our minutes. And this minutes is referencing this range here. Remember before we had our ranges in the brackets at the end? Now it's going to be transferred to this range in the map here.
Is it
And then,
so have you previously defined minutes? How did it know what you meant when you typed minutes?
yeah, so this is where we're defining minutes. So this
Okay.
is the point in which we make our definition. So seconds. Okay, so here we've defined what minutes are. Here we've said we want to state minutes here as a parameter, and that minutes parameter is going to reference this value here. And then our seconds, this needs to reference this value here. If we have something, if we have another range called milliseconds, for example, we'd have to put in that range here and then put a comma and then type in milliseconds. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so from here we need to do just the same formula that we did in the Lambda function. So join, and then a colon, and here we're going to type 10 seconds. And we'll close our join this time, close our Lambda function this time, and close our map this time, and we'll hit tab. Okay,
Ooh.
so now this is where it becomes powerful. Instead of having a function on each one of the rows here, we've had this join function at the top, and this handles everything that runs down the entire range that we provided here.
That looks a little bit like what some product does when you're just
Yeah,
multiplying an entire column, 2 columns.
some product array formulas can do something similar. We could even do, you could sort of do something with query, but it's probably not the most efficient approach. But it definitely does help out with this array building. Let's do another quick example over here. So we can do total in seconds. So let's combine these two values and get the total in seconds of them again. So the approach again is very similar to the previous one. So we'll go map. And then we want to select our array, first array, and then we'll set our seconds array. And then we'll add our lambda function. And we want to define these first and second arrays again. So that's going to be minutes, and that will be seconds. Now we can add in our formula expression. So what do we need to do to get the total seconds of these two values? Well, first we need to multiply 60 by the minutes and then add the seconds to those total seconds here. So we can type in minutes multiplied by 60 and then add seconds. Then we can close that lambda function and then close the map function and hit tab. And that is the total in seconds of this value here, and then the next value, and then the next value, and so on.
Got it. So if
Cool.
you had 100 rows, it would take the same amount of time.
Yeah, so if you had 100 rows, then you could change the range values here to
Mm.
the 100 rows, or you could even keep it open like this and do the same thing. And of course, there's nothing on here, so it's going to report 0. You could do a if error to handle this, or just leave it if you're okay with that. Now, what do we do it to? 8. Let's put that back. Okay. Now, I think the reason why this came in conjunction with the name functions is that we can add this into the name functions really easily. It's already naming parts of this function, so it makes it fairly convenient. So let's go up to data here and click on name functions. And you can see I've already got one for this combined minutes and seconds. So let's just add a new function now. And let's make something in my usual verbose way. Minutes, seconds, minutes, seconds, 2. Let me think. Total seconds. I'm sure the
Yeah,
viewers can
man.
come up with something more concise, but well,
Let's just see if that auto completes when you start to type it in a cell. I don't remember.
it will. And there's another function called minutes, so should come up with two.
Hmm.
I think it is. So this, what does it do? So it calculates. Oops, let's get off caps lock. The total time in seconds for each row where one range is in minutes and the other is in seconds. Awesome. Okay, so let's just skip this argument placeholder for the time being and put in our formula. So let's just Control A to select it all and Control C, and then go over it and add in the formula. And from here, we can grab, it already comes up with some suggestions for the arguments, and this is going to be the ranges that we use here, this B4 and C4. And if I click on one of them, we can replace the instance, and why don't we just make it simple and say minutes? Hit define. And we'll do the same for the seconds. And hit define. So now when we use this name function, we can use any range we want. We don't have to go back to using this B4 through to C8. We can use any range on our sheet in any location. We can click next, and then we can describe our minutes. So we can say our range of minutes, very imaginative,
Yeah.
but it makes a point. And we can make an example. So B4 to B8, and then a range of seconds. And that's going to be C4 to C8, and then create. Nice. So now we've got that up here. Let's see if we can run that just here. There it is there.
Yeah, and I see that
And
little badge next to it that said named function.
yeah, and you can see it down here. I really
Wow.
like this part too, and I like the fact that it keeps the original formula in there. So if you're trying to troubleshoot a problem, you can see that in there too. So it's prompting us to put in minutes now, so we can click on those minutes, and then it prompts us to put in seconds. We put in those seconds, and hopefully it should match. But yeah, so these two are different formulas, but they're identical now. This one is using our new name functions.
I think it feels like a lot of work when you're creating it, but then when you're done and you go to reuse it, it really all comes together and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a tool that you can use if you're the person that's been allocated to make these complex formulas, you can build them together, make them super easy for someone else to use, and then share them wherever you like.
And then
Okay.
you can act like it took the same amount of work. I'm like, oh man, been working all day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they look so easy then. So the boss is going to say, "Hey, what have you been doing all day?"
Yeah.
And it's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Yeah. When we're not advocating that, children, just be honest.
Fair enough. Do you want to try out the reduce?
Let's do it.
All right, let's head over. So this one I made just for you, Adam, to infuriate your accounting mind.
Oh, relax,
Okay,
Adam. Relax.
so this is a terrible example. Essentially, what reduce does is allows us to grab an original value and then a range, and then from there, we're going to iterate through that range, starting with that original value and carry out some sort of formula on it. So we could use text to combine text based on different rules, or we could use numbers that we have here and get a sum of them based on whatever example that we have. So in this example, what we're going to do is we've got some last month's sales tax that we need to record, and we need to add that to the current month's sales tax for these sales items here. Now, normally you might want to do your sales tax along here by multiplying your sales tax percentage by the value, and then dragging it all the way down and then getting the sum of all these plus this to get your total value. So that would look a little bit like this. Times the sales tax. Now we've got to make sure that doesn't move, so we'll lock it in with a absolute reference. And we'll hit tab, and then we'll drag it down. And then we would normally then go equals sum. Hide that for now. Grab that, close the brackets, and then add that extra value from the previous month. And that will give us a value. So first we'll type in reduce. And reduce requires two functions. Hopefully it'll just come up here as well. Yeah, so it'll come up with an initial value for reduce, which is going to be this one. And so that's our starting value we need to add to everything. And then we need an array or range, which is going to be this one here. From there, we can start our Lambda function. Okay, so for the Lambda function for this reduce, it actually only needs two parameters. The first one is going to be an accumulator. And the second one is going to be the current value, which we'll just call current. And any of the programmers here will recognize this with the JavaScript reduce function. It's essentially the same. So the accumulator stores the accumulated values as it iterates through each row of the array that it looks at, starting with this previous value here. So it'll start off with this $44.74 on the first iteration, and then it will add the 1580 times the 0.1 for 10% value. And then the next one, it'll keep adding on these values as 10% of them as it iterates through to get the total reduced value into a single value. All right, so let's look at the formula now. So we need the current value. So it's a currently iterated value. And we need to multiply that by the sales tax, which is here. And then once we've done that, we need to add that value to the accumulator. And we'll hit tab. So let me explain that just again. So we've got our starting value here, which is this one. And then we've got the range we want to apply our Lambda function to. And then we've got our accumulator and our current value as our two parameters. And then on every time we iterate through each one of these, just hit it. Every time we iterate through each one of these, we want to multiply the current value by the sales tax and add the accumulator. Now, I completely understand that we can get the total sum of each one of these and then multiply it by 10%. I was trying to make the simplest possible example for us so we can understand what reduce is. The power that comes into place, though, is when you add or make a more complex version of reduce. So I've got a little example over here. So this time round, we've got we've got the same values here, but anything that's over 25%, we want to add 12% to it. So once this reaches 25, so we want to subtract 25 from 33 and then apply 12% to the difference and then 10% to 20. So our formula looks a little bit like this. Now, we won't go into details on this because we've just got a basic summary of what reduce does, but I just wanted to highlight that we can make something more complex here. And this is where reduce becomes a little bit more powerful. And it's also something you might struggle to do on things like array formulas or the query function.
And that does reduce require Lambda inside of it?
Yeah, so all these helper functions require Lambda inside of them to run because they help. The Lambda function helps make the parameters or those parameter statements in plain English. So we've got that accumulator and current value. That's what Lambda does to help generate that. So we can then apply the accumulator and the current value inside the formula.
Wow, awesome. Okay, cool.
Cool.
You just put a
So
lot of CPAs out of business. Scott, we're just going to use that formula now.
Excellent. So hopefully I went for something very basic that was irritating and something somewhat less irritating for you. All right, so let's from here, instead of having this total sales tax amount, what if we wanted to do a rolling total, starting with this previous month starting sales tax? We can use the scan function for this.
Just kind of the opposite theory.
So actually the scan function is almost the same as the reduce function, and it has the same methodology, but instead of just doing a reduce down to a single value, what it actually does is produce the rolling total value as each formula is being produced as it goes down and iterates through each one of the items in the array. So let's go ahead and build this one out, and you'll notice a heap of similarity with the reduce function, so it's a great way to remember it. So let's type in scan. And we first need to get our starting initial value here. I'll just hide this out of the way for the time being. And then we need this array or range, which is going to be this one here. And then we can apply our lambda function. Okay, so this time around, instead of saying accumulator and current, we're going to use a very common shorthand for reduce functions and lambda functions like this. We're going to use the ACC for accumulator and the CUR for current. Okay, so from here, it's the same formula. So we just grab the current value and multiply it by the sales tax, and then add the accumulator. And we close the lambda function, and then we close scan and hit tab to get out. And now you can see we've got this rolling total as it generates down the list, just with a single formula. That looks fairly neat and tidy, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So from there, I guess, as I've been banging on a little bit about while I've been talking to you, the lambda functions go into their own when we're using a very complex functional base. So I've got an example here of something I've done in a previous tutorial. And this one allows us to make an array of random values, perhaps for password generation or something like that. And then it not only does it make a single cell, but it allows us to make a number of random values based on how many rows we want and how many columns that we want. And you can see here we've used the make array helper function for this lambda one, and then the map function that you and I just did previously to look through and iterate through each one of these characters here to generate a random value. That's where it gets really handy.
And can you provide a link to this as a shared spreadsheet that the viewers can check it out?
For this one, I've got a video tutorial, so I'm happy to share that link with you if you like. And I think that also comes with a link to as a starter tutorial so people can step through each stage along with me.
Yeah, we'll put that link as a card in the video.
Sounds great. So this isn't great just for an academic purpose. I also use this in practice. So I have a named functions pack here that I have as a product on my website. And I've got a number of these, for example, word jumble, the random alpha random string users, the lambda functions, and a great many of these other functions here also rely on the lambda functions just to make my life easier for producing these, and also makes it easy for me to edit or modify them should a client want to make a modification for their own product.
Excellent.
But that's about wraps it up from my side.
How can people get a hold of you, Scott?
You can get a hold of me on YouTube, yagisanatade.com. Just search for that. I am on LinkedIn under Scott Donald or Yagi-san Atade for my business page, and Twitter with a really strange name of Life of a Spy, which just was a bad business idea that didn't work, but now I'm holding on to it.
Kind of like
And
the name Prolific Oak Tree.
oh, that's a great name. Don't be down about that one. It's fantastic.
All All right, Scott, thank you for coming on. I think you did a good job of showing a lot of things that are kind of next level from what is typically shown on this channel. So users can definitely understand the name functions, but then you show how to extend it in some practical ways. So thanks a lot, and we will see you soon.
Great. Thanks for having me on.